Hello everyone, it is so nice to see you again. Welcome back to my channel. I don't really have any fun quips to say at the beginning, so let's just get right into it. Today I'm going to be doing the mid-year book freakout tag. Prompt number 1 is the best book that I've read so far in 2020, and I've read a lot of really great books so far this year, but I had to go with Radio Silence by Hausman. I'd like to give some honorable mentions to The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, which was one of the first books I read this year. And I also really loved With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Azevedo. But I really have to give it to Radio Silence because I sat and bawled my eyes out. I read this all in one day, which I haven't done in a really, really long time, honestly. Just because I don't read that fast anymore, but this I just flew through. I could not put it down. I had to finish it, especially past a certain point. I was like, okay, I can't stop reading this now. I need to get to the resolution. So I'm going to talk more about this later because I feel like I might cry if I talk too much about that, so we're going to save that for later in the video. But yeah, Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. Best book that I read in 2020. Next we have best sequel that you've read in 2020, and this is actually the only sequel that I read in 2020, but good news is that it was a great one. It's The Last of August by Brittany Cavallaro. It's part of her Sherlock Holmes quartet. This book really surprised me, and the same with the first one, because I tried to read the first book a few summers ago and could not get into it. I ended up DNFing it as a physical book and then gave it a try last December as an audiobook, and I really ended up loving it. And I picked this up in February, March, and I loved it even more. I cried at this. The mystery in this was not my favorite, but the way that Charlotte and Jamie's relationship is written, Brittany Cavallaro just really has a way with words, and I was going through it, reading this. I was like taking pictures of different passages that I was like keeling over at and sending them to my friends who do not read these books. Yeah, I love this book. I love the relationship between Charlotte and Jamie. It's just like, it's so complicated. They both have so much going on, especially Charlotte. You know, they're not like realistic high schoolers at all, but who is in any of these books? Yeah, so this was definitely my favorite sequel of the year. I love these characters. I can't wait to read the rest of the series. Next prompt is a new release that I haven't read yet but want to, and that is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Azevedo. So I know that Clap When You Land was highly anticipated for a lot of booktubers and people in the book community, and given that With the Fire on High is also one of my favorite books that I've read this year, I can't wait to get my hands on this. I believe that it's written in verse, which is something that I don't read much of, so I'm excited to read that. So this book is about two girls and their shared father who dies in a plane crash, and through the grieving process they discover each other, I believe. I don't know terribly much about this book, and I'd kind of prefer to keep it that way. I want it to be a surprise. I want to just experience it as I read it. So that's something that I'm hoping to pick up soon. Next prompt is my most anticipated release for the second half of the year, and this is absolutely a no-brainer for me. It is Ironheart by Nina Varela. I read Crier's War at the end of the year last year in December, and it ended up being my favorite book of the year. It's incredible. I can't believe it was a debut. The writing is like, it's so tight, it's so good. The characters are amazing, the world building, it's so unique. I just loved it. I can't wait to see what happens. I'm not sure if this is a duology, so I'm not sure if this is wrapping it up. In any case, I'm excited to read it. Whatever happens, I can't wait. So next we have the biggest disappointment of the year, and unfortunately for me this was The Beautiful by Renee Audier. This was kind of hard to choose because I wouldn't say I had many disappointments per se. Like, I kind of knew what I was expecting going into most of the books that I read. I guess this one was disappointing in that I wanted it to be better than it was. Like, I knew it wasn't getting the greatest reviews, and I had an inkling that it might not be the book for me, but I wanted it to be. It was very slow paced for me. I wasn't a huge fan of the writing. I wasn't a huge fan of the Google Translate French that was thrown in. I was like, I would appreciate it if you would stop just chucking random French phrases into it. Like, we get it. It's set in New Orleans and the main character's from France. I did not appreciate that. So yeah, kind of a weird choice. Like, I wasn't expecting much, but it was disappointing because I wanted it to be better. So next we have Biggest Surprise. So for this I chose two different books. The first is Educated by Tara Westover, which is a memoir about Tara Westover's life growing up with survivalist parents and how she came to get an education. later in life. So this book is a lot. It's very graphic. There are a lot of injuries and harrowing things that Tara and her family went through as she was growing up. So just be aware of that if you decide to read it. This is something I read as an audiobook, which I listened to while I was running. So when she was describing some of these injuries and I'm out for a run and I'm like, because she goes into detail for some of them and it's just like, ma'am, that's enough for me. But yeah, it's so interesting to read a first-hand account of growing up in a family like Tara's. She was completely isolated from the outside world for the most part. And it was inspiring to read about her discovering herself and gaining confidence in her own abilities. Yeah, I would really recommend it. I'm not usually one for nonfiction. I kind of struggle with it sometimes, but Educated was great and it really surprised me. My second surprise was I Want to Be Where You Are by Christina Forrest, and this was a surprise because it was a pretty short book, and normally I'm not the biggest fan of short books necessarily. I want something longer, a little chunkier with a bit more content to it. I ended up really liking it. It was really sweet. From the summary I was like, okay, so it's just gonna be a sweet love story, but it was like, it was so cute. I would really recommend it to anyone. It's so lighthearted. I loved it. So it centers around a road trip that Chloe goes on to audition for a ballet company with her neighbor and former friend Eli, who she has since fallen out of contact with. So I was expecting something kind of like light and fluffy, but I really ended up enjoying this. This was really sweet. So for prompt 7, favorite new author, I've chosen Christina Forrest. I can't wait to read more of her work, and Christina Forrest's next book, Now That I've Found You, comes out in August, so that's another book that I'm really anticipating for the second half of the year. I'm really excited to read that. Next we have newest fictional crush, and for this I'm going with Nathan Allen from I Wish You All the Best, which is written by Mason Deaver. I only recently finished this book, and Nathan Allen is definitely my newest fictional crush, especially for a little non-binary person like me, because Nathan and Ben, I don't know, it was just something that I needed to read, you know. I needed to read a nice story of an NB person falling in love. And someone falling in love with an NB person. It gives me hope for myself, for the future. Yeah, this book is really important. I would recommend reading it if you're non-binary, if you're not non-binary. The way that Ben's experience is described felt very true to life for me, so if you're looking to educate yourself a little bit more about the non-binary community, and if you are a non-binary person who just needs to read something nice. This isn't like, it's not entirely fluff. Ben goes through some shit, obviously, but it's real great. It's real great. Nathan, he's the best! Oh my god, he's so funny. Is it clear that this is a fictional crush? I'm like, daydreaming. Yeah, I'm gonna stop myself here, because that's enough from me. So now we're going back to Radio Silence for newest favorite character, Alad Last, and book that made me cry, which is Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. So, as I mentioned, I read this all in one day, and there was about, like, I don't know, probably the last 100 pages or so of the book, I was just bawling. I was absolutely bawling my eyes out. It's very emotionally powerful, and Alad Last is my favorite character because I relate to him on a lot of different levels, especially, the part that made me cry the most is like after he goes off to college, and his experience with his freshman year is kind of very similar to mine. I don't know, it just made me, I don't want to get too emo here. I'm like, ugh. So it just made me cry because Alad Last, I relate to him a lot, and seeing the way that his friends care about him, I was just like, oh, that's exactly what he needed, and it was very cathartic to read. It's so powerful, and the relationships, and like coming to have confidence in yourself. I don't know, I can't describe too much without giving away spoilers. Another reason that I absolutely bawled was because I thought I knew a spoiler for this book, which was not the case. Basically, I was waiting the whole book for it to happen, and I didn't want it to happen, so when it didn't, that was a great moment for me. I was already crying kind of in anticipation of what I thought was going to happen, and then I ended up crying because of what actually happened. So there were just tears all around, you know. So next we have Book That Made You Happy, and this actually also makes me cry sometimes, but because of happy tears. I've been reading a whole lot of Haikyuu by Haruichi Furudate. I think I started rereading in probably January or February. It just makes me happy. It's a story about the Karasuno High School Volleyball Club on their journey through their volleyball season. I don't know, there's just a lot about the power of friendship, bonding. I love it. It's so sweet, and I have such an attachment to like all of the teams who have more than one game or like an extended amount of time focused on these people. They're all so great. My favorite characters are Tsukishima, Oikawa, and Kuro, so take that as you will. Read me, I guess. I like bitches. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Next we have Most Beautiful Book That You've Bought This Year. For me that has to be A Song of Wraiths and Ruin by Roseanne Brown. It's stunning, honestly. This cover, the green dress, the green and gold cover in general. We have Karina here with her silver hair. It's just, the power that this cover exudes is unmatched. I am about 76 pages into it and I'm excited to read more because look at this. This deserves all of my love and attention. And finally we have books that I need to read by the end of the year. So first I'll go ahead and list nonfiction that I'm hoping to finish by the end of the year. The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, I should have done by the middle of July. I also want to read White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, and Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Beverly Tatum. So those are my goals for the end of the year. I also want to hopefully be done with the Percy Jackson reread I'm doing with Brophy. We'll have to see how our lives end up going if we end up being too busy, but that's something that is on my radar and that I, as of right now, should be finishing by the end of the year, but again, we'll have to see how things work out. I really want to read Felix Ever After by Case and Callender. It's a story about a black trans boy, and I realized after reading I Wish You All the Best that I really need to read more books about trans characters because it makes me feel better to see that representation. So that counts as another new release that I haven't picked up yet, but really want to. Hopefully I will be able to get to that by the end of the year. Finally, I have a really bad habit of starting series and then not following through on finishing them, even when I very easily could. So I'm hoping to finish some series that I have not finished yet by the end of the year. First of all, I want to read Always and Forever Lara Jean by Jenny Han. I reread To All the Boys I Loved Before and read P.S. I Still Love You for the first time last spring, early spring. My impulse is to reread the first two before reading this one, but I know if I do that I'll probably fall off and not read this one again. Plus I don't really have the time to spend rereading even more books. I need to read some of the new books that I have. So my goal is to read this before the end of the year so I can say I have completed reading this series. And I also want to read The Case for Jamie and A Question of Holmes by the end of this year by Brittany Cavallaro. For the same reasons, I just want to carry through on finishing series. And I also really loved The Last of August, as I already mentioned, so I'm excited to see what the rest of this series holds. So yeah, that's it for me. Let me know what books you're planning to read before the end of the year down below. If you did the mid-year book tag, I'd love to check it out. Yeah, that does it for me. I'll see you guys next time.